well did everybody go with their homework? Did people access the VIA character strength survey? Did you take a bit of time to sort of assess what your character strengths are, your signature strengths, what makes you tick? Okay. And of those people who are nodding their heads, thank you very much. During the course of the week, were you more aware of your strengths? Yes? Okay. So for those people who didn't do the character strengths exercise last week, don't worry. It's online. You can access it anytime. Just not sure if we've got some interference, but it's okay. So it's really important to know what your character strengths are, because that way you can actually work on your strengths and find new ways to integrate your strengths into your everyday tasks, okay? And basically it makes sense, doesn't it? If you use your strengths, you become stronger. So we're not necessarily talking about physical strength, but if you use the same analogy, the same principle would apply if you were to go to a gym and make a commitment to build your abs and your this and your that. So it's the same thing with our inner resources. At the end of the day, we're talking about building positivity, resilience. So I really highly recommend you to spend a bit of time identifying your character strengths. Now, last week, just a little bit of a catch-up, we were talking about how the brain has an inbuilt negativity bias. And that is basically, it's a survival thing. Otherwise, we would be going around burning ourselves a lot more, potentially getting, run over, or, terrible things could happen. So it's basically because negativity is hardwired, getting to a more positive mindset takes a bit more effort, okay? So growing the good. We talked about the Teflon versus the Teflon for the positive and Velcro for the negative in terms of the brain. We also did a bit of a brainstorm about endorphin boosters, things that make you smile on the inside, which essentially help you smile on the outside. And really it's about pausing and absorbing these things, not just sort of letting them happen without actually paying attention. So how do we identify our endorphin boosters and really, really soaking into them? Now, it's all very well and good. I can talk to you probably for a very, very long time about the importance of positivity, resilience, and all of the things, that strategies that you can do to help over time build a happier brain. But in many of us, we have negative self-talk, okay? And one of the reasons we have, I'll just say before we do that, we are going to be countering this negative self-talk by having a focus on self-compassion, because this is what negative self-talk actually looks like in the brain, okay? It's your inner saboteur, and we do not want an inner saboteur. So it doesn't matter how much work we do, if our brain is just sort of saying, you know what, you're actually not worth it. Give up already. It's going to be a lot more difficult to actually get that sort of from Teflon to the Velcro for the positive. So we need to have strategies to be able to deal with our own inner saboteur. Now, this inner saboteur tends to already have taken place, in our mind from a very, very early age, from when we were children. Our self-talk develops. How we were talked to as children. Were we encouraged? How much criticism, how much compassion, how much empathy we were given as children. In the playground, by our parents, by our friends. And these things, the way we are now, it's a cumulative effect from very, very early on. So some of us need to try that much harder to really conquer our inner saboteur. So, I said to you, I think in week 1, it's about the whole notion of positivity, resilience. It's not about going around and saying everything is fantastic all the time. The world is a bed of roses. I'm infallible. Nothing bad ever happens to me or my loved ones. That's not what it's about. It's about finding the truth about yourself and the situation that you're in, okay? It's about sort of stepping back and actually perhaps the next thing I'm about to say is you don't always have to believe what you think. Do you sort of fall into that trap? It's like, well, I think it, therefore it must be true. But sometimes those thoughts that we have, they're not particularly helpful. So we need to sort of distance ourselves a little bit from those. And that's where the next thing we're going to be talking about, mindfulness and self-compassion, really comes in and helps us address this. So, self-compassion. Before we delve into self-compassion, I'd like to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, in your head, how compassionate do you think you are? Compassionate to others? Okay, scale of 1 to 10. Everybody got a number? Okay, good. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how self-compassionate are you? Okay, I just would like to just have a little bit of a guess here. I'm going to make an assumption that most people here do compassion pretty well. I would say or suggest that your levels of compassion to others potentially around the 8 or so range mark. Am I sort of on ball here? Yep, on the ballpark, right? What about self-compassion? 9, 10? No. What would be a figure, perhaps, that you think might be an average for... 2. Oh my goodness. Okay. The reality is that generally speaking, it does not seem to matter where in the globe we're talking about or the particular group. People tend to be quite compassionate about other people. So they're up here, whereas self-compassion levels are down here. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should become more self-compassionate than compassionate, but it's about addressing the balance. So bringing up self-compassion and knowing that by building actually this inner strength of self-compassion, you're actually growing your overall compassion. It's not just for yourself, but for others. So who here prior to tonight would even conceive of self-compassion being an inner strength? It's not something that we're taught in school, is it? So this thing about self-compassion, it is definitely an inner strength, and that's what we're about building, which you can draw on in instances of perceived inadequacy, failure, or general suffering. What tends to happen is that when situations get challenging or when a problem arises, we become so busy fixing it that we actually don't acknowledge some of the feelings that go along with that particular difficult situation. Okay? You don't, really, you just keep going and going and going until, well, who knows. Now, self-compassion is actually composed of 3 components, okay? So the first thing is about self-kindness, to be kind to yourself. The second aspect is actually linking it to common humanity in that everybody goes through challenges. Everybody can do with self-compassion, okay? And it's also about mindfulness. It's about stepping back and seeing how we can approach this from a more of a kind self way. Now, the problem is that I think that self-compassion gets a bit of a bad rap because it's not really understood. There's a lot of confusion, I think, out there that self-compassion has something to do with self-esteem or it's being selfish or it's self-pity or self-indulgence. It's actually not. It's like enlightened self-interest, enlightened self-care. And another dimension to self-compassion is actually bringing in a quality of mindfulness where you can sit back from some of these more challenging situations and apply self-compassion to a particular predicament. Now, why would we do that? I just, you think that I'm talking about something new here tonight. Well, I would just like to alert you to this magnificent quote by Rabbi Hillel from Pirkei Avot. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But when I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So really, is self-compassion such a new concept? No. Now, self-compassionate people tend to become more resilient. It lowers that critical voice, self-criticism, which is that inner saboteur. Helps also with levels of decreasing levels of depression, anxiety, and it builds your self-worth. So basically it builds your strength. It enhances well-being and life satisfaction. And the great thing about a self-compassionate perspective is we are available 24/7 to provide it. And the only person who can provide self-compassion is you. So what I thought we would do just for the next few minutes is actually experience a bit of a self-compassion break. Okay, has anybody here experienced a self-compassion break before? You have, wonderful. Well, we're going to do it this way and you can let me know afterwards what you think. So if I can just please invite you all to close your eyes, and if you're not comfortable closing your eyes, just to fix your gaze somewhere neutral. And I'm going to, through this process, through this little self-compassion break, I'm going to be introducing you to the three central components of self-compassion, which are the following. So if you can just please call to mind something that you're sort of challenging, you know, some challenge or something that's you sort of causing a bit of pain or suffering. Nothing too big, please. Just something that's causing you a little bit of stress or a challenge. And just really get in touch with this particular challenge or pain or stress. And think if there's anybody else involved in this particular situation and how it's making you feel at the moment. So really naming it, that this is a moment of suffering. This is a challenging time. That's the first statement that we introduce. The second thing is that suffering or going through adversity or going through challenges is very much linked to our humanity. That's what being human is. We go through stuff. You've been through stuff before, and no doubt you'll go through more challenges in your lifetime. So acknowledging that everybody goes through difficult times, everybody goes through challenges. The specifics will be different, but there is a common link to our shared humanity. And the third statement that I'm going to introduce you to is to be kind to yourself in this moment. Perhaps there's something that you can say to yourself that, you've been through something like this before, you'll get through it again, you're doing the best that you possibly can in the given moment. And if you're finding it challenging connecting to this self-compassionate voice, perhaps you would like to step outside of your own self and pretend that you're giving compassion to another person. What would you say to them? Perhaps some words that come to mind and placing maybe a heartfelt hand over your heart as you're connecting to these feelings of self-compassion and compassion. And when you're ready, if you just open your eyes. Now, I've only got another moment, so I can't go into too much depth. I'll really speak really quickly. Did anybody sort of find that there was a shift from being able to offer yourself self-compassion to when I suggested that maybe you pretend that you are your own best friend? It's very common because, we tend to be much better friends to other people than to ourselves. And I think that it's really, really important to come back to, as I say, to ourselves, because then we can give much more to others as well. So, final take-home message from these last two sessions and from tonight is, you are your own PR CEO. I just came up with that. I thought that was cool. Positivity, resilience CEO. You have a lot more control than perhaps you have ever conceived that you had. remember that Teflon Velcro analogy. Remember that because the brain has this inbuilt negativity bias, we have to work a lot harder to achieve a happier brain, to build a positive mindset. To really grow the good and hardwire these resources, it's really important to let them soak in, to notice these things. You know, the gratitude practice that we did in the first week, to pause and absorb, like we were discussing with the endorphins, really as if you're a sponge for positivity. Notice, pause, and absorb. And the other thing is, I can speak to you about things that work for me, but at the end of the day, this is about you. So it's about what strategies you can identify that are best suited to you. So I'd love to stay in touch, and yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob.